to the beginning here. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Camille. I've been beekeeping for about the last 5 years now. Um, Looks like everyone can hear me in chat. Awesome, thank you. So we're going to be going over putting your bees to bed for winter. Some people will consider this the beginning of the beekeeping year. I've always thought that's a little bit funny, but you're basically starting your spring success rate right now. You want to make sure your colony is nice and strong. They can get through the winter. They can continue for spring buildup. If you have a weak colony now, you're going to have a die off later. If you have a weak colony now, you're not going to have a spring buildup. So you're preparing for next season right now. We're going to go over what the bees will do biologically in wintertime, whether they're going to be the same as summer bees, whether they're going to act the same, what's going to happen in the cluster, that sort of thing. We're going to look at reasons for colony death, cold, moisture, varroa, that sort of deal, wind shear, how to prepare your hive in the Willamette Valley. Some people do quite a bit of wintering tests. Some people do kind of a minimalist thing, so we'll get into that as well. And when to feed and inspect, when you can get into your colony in wintertime, when you can emergency feed, whether or not you should. So let's get started. So bees don't actually hibernate. They're kind of like a pseudo hibernation. They are active inside the hive, even if they are in a cluster. They're moving around, they're feeding, they are actively controlling their temperatures. So that means that they will continue to need to eat. And on warmer days, they will actually break that cluster and begin to fly. In Western Oregon, humidity is far more dangerous than cold. So if you're wrapping your hives completely, you're trapping moisture inside and you're actually creating more dangerous conditions. Pointing. So winter losses can be severe, especially when you're a beginner, but they vary. Even experienced beekeepers can lose quite a bit of colonies during wintertime. Even if you do everything right, sometimes the year just isn't what it should be. Generally, new packages and nukes have the highest mortality. They're still getting used to their hive. They're still building up this comb. They're using all these energy resources to do a lot of building rather than building up for winter. So you're most at risk with a brand new colony. If you've had overwintered colonies, you've got all that comb, they're storing everything, you're going to have a higher success rate. 2024 and 2025 seasonal losses. Statewide, Oregon backyard hobbyists lost about 26%. This is from Pacific Northwest Honeybee Loss Survey. Dewey Caron's been doing this for many, many years now, so he's got a lot of information if you want to check out his website. You can see year-to-year losses, you can see Corvallis losses, you can see state losses. So if you're curious, like, how am I doing? Check out this website, check out what percentages are looking like. You can look from year to year, from location to location, and just kind of base how you're doing based on these numbers here. Corvallis area losses were particularly high last year at about 50%. Commercial losses, depending on where you look, have been around 60%. So last year was kind of a devastating year for a lot of people.
Last year wasn't even that cold.
It was a lot of different factors. It wasn't necessarily the cold. There was mite pressure, there was disease pressure, just all sorts of things kind of went haywire last year. And it's kind of inconclusive too. Beekeeper to beekeeper, they're all going to give you a completely different answer. Like, oh, it was mites. Oh, it was queen death. Oh, it was this. Oh, it was that. So you've got a lot of different people out there suffering from a lot of different things, but it seems to be happening pretty consistently year to year. So maybe we're just missing something. There are new mites out there too, which we're starting to study. So important to note, temperatures at which different bee activities take place. You can find this in your beekeeper's handbook. This is one of my favorite graphs right here. So we're talking about ambient air conditions out here. We're about to head into a weekend. We're going to hit triple digits. Your queen's going to stop laying because it's just going to be too hot. Totally normal. Don't worry about it. You didn't lose your queen. She just realizes it's way too hot to raise brood. We're going to take a little bit of a vacation. Certain temperatures, it's unsafe to get into your hive. So if outside temperatures are below 55 degrees, you should really think hard about getting into your hive. If it's a dire situation, you can get in up to down to 50 degrees to do a real quick emergency feed and get the heck out of there. But if it's below 50 degrees, you're actually harming the bees more than you're helping them, even if you're going to do an emergency feed. Not only are you breaking the propolis seal, you are making it so they have to repair that propolis seal. It takes a couple of days for them to repair that seal to prevent wind chill and to be able to properly cluster again. So if you're breaking that propolis seal and it's like, oh, it's 50 degrees right now, but it's going to drop again tomorrow and it's going to be super cold and we can't do it anymore. Think about that because you're breaking that propolis seal. It's going to get really cold. It's going to be really hard for the bees to recover from that. Keep your winter visits to an absolute minimum. Moving into winter, you're going to see your populations naturally start to decline into late August. We're early August right now. So you're still seeing pretty good brood production. The queen is raising the bees that will be raising your winter bees right now. Peak summer populations, 60 to 80,000 bees. Going into winter, populations can be half of this. Going into spring, it's half of that. So you're going from 60,000 to 30,000, then to 15,000 coming into spring again. So you're going to see quite a lot of change in your colony. Part of the population drop is drones. You're going to see a large adult population drop really, really quickly coming into August here. The drones are going to be expelled from the hive. The colony realizes we're not really going to be raising queens right now. We're not going to be spreading our genetic material. These are just extra mouths to feed. So they're going to kick all of the drones out of the hive, have fewer mouths to feed. They're going to be more prepared for winter, but you're going to see a lot of really confused and upset drones at the entrance to your hive. This is totally natural. Your fall brood become super bees or fat bees. And these are the bees that are physiologically different from your regular in-season bees. The in-season foragers are going to last about 6 weeks. Foraging takes a toll. They only last 6 weeks. When you get into winter bees, your fat bees, they actually come out physiologically different. If you slice them open, look at them under a microscope, they look completely different. From the outside, they're identical. Inside, their fat stores are about twice as big. So you're going to see these fat bees lasting up to 3 months. And those are going to carry you all through winter until your queen is able to start raising new brood.
Are they fat bees from the beginning or?
Yep, they're born as fat bees. It's a physiological difference. So they're born as a fat bee. Around October, all the drones are gone, your population is down. The queen is actually going to completely stop rearing brood. So if you're looking in your hive in October, like, all right, I'm almost ready for winter. I just want to do a quick peek. Oh gosh, I'm queenless. Don't worry about it. It's just naturally stopped. Depending on where you are, this will happen at a different time or may not happen at all. So if you're in Florida or California or something, it's hot all winter long. You don't really have to worry about being broodless because it's definitely a temperature thing. The queen doesn't have to stop laying if it stays nice and warm. It's because of our winters that she stops laying. It reduces the load on the worker bees to keep the colony warm. Because like if you see in this slide right here, the brood nest is going to be somewhere around 93 degrees. If you are broodless, you can bring that down to about 83 degrees. So that takes a lot less energy to keep the colony a little bit cooler. So they're all working together to make it so that they can all get through winter here. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but if anyone wants to take a picture, I just thought it was kind of a beautiful piece of prose, the massacre of the drones. And we're going to put this up on YouTube later as well, so you can definitely check this out later. It's just a interesting kind of personified behavior. So clustering behavior. What does it actually look like when a bee clusters? It's a little difficult to wrap your mind around it because you've got this big old rectangle box and you're trying to think like, how does a circle fit into that? So there are frames in the center. It does break up the cluster a little bit, but the bees are actually in a circle in there. They're in a sphere and they're creating an outer shell. The workers are kind of standing close to each other. Their thoraxes are touching. Their thoraxes are really hairy. It's creating a nice protective seal all around the actual active cluster. So you've got probably about a 2-inch layer on the outer shell of bees that are just sticking there, keeping the heat in. Your active cluster is shivering for heat. They're running around. They're taking care of the queen. They are feeding each other. They are basically just doing what bees do inside the hive. And then as soon as solstice happens, your queen is going to start slowly laying again. And then inside that cluster in the very, very center, you're going to have the warmer brood area. So they are pretty active throughout winter. It's not something like, oh, well, they're asleep. They're in there, they're active, they're doing their thing. They're just not actively flying and foraging. They're consuming all the winter stores that they worked all season to build up.
So they're clustered around the brood frames on the deep
So
or around?
good question. They actually move. Let's see, I think it's a couple slides ahead. So they are clustered in the bottom box ideally when winter begins. And depending on how cold it is or how warm it is, that cluster will shrink or expand depending on temperature. And they will actually move very slowly throughout the wintertime as they collect resources. So on warmer days, they'll expand and they'll go out to the outer frames and they'll eat the honey there. Then they'll shrink down when it gets colder and stay nice and warm. And then throughout the season, all of the clustered area is going to become empty and they're going to slowly move up until they're up in the upper brood chambers. And then they'll do the same thing. And by the time they're in the upper brood chamber, hopefully it is warm enough that they can slowly go out and forage, and then you can do some emergency feeding before the spring buildup and the warm temperatures hit.
So on mine, I've got the honey super over the deep, and that's gonna be their winter
Mhm.
feed. Are they gonna go up into there to get that?
Most of the time, yes. So some beekeepers think it's silly to have an extra honey super on for winter feed. Some beekeepers think it's really important. I'm kind of leaning towards I like to have that extra honey on there. Yes, you want about 60 to 80 pounds to overwinter, and 2 brood boxes can encapsulate that amount of honey. I leave an extra honey super on just for them. And then if it's really cold and really wet and they can't go out and you can't emergency feed, that's just some extra insurance and they can continue moving up from that first brood box to that second brood box into your honey super. And that's just your insurance. So they have a little bit of extra food. If something goes south, the winter goes long, they're not going to starve to death. I have had it save my colony a couple of times in the last few years. But not all beekeepers think that. So whichever way you feel. Did I miss you?
Thinking about the emergency feeding.
Mhm.
So there's the sugar water and then there's the protein. Are you talking about emergency feeding as adding sugar in the winter?
So good question. What is emergency feeding? We're going to get to that a little bit later, but in short, you should never feed your bees anything liquid in the wintertime. It's too cold. There's too much moisture in the air. Any extra moisture you're adding to the hive is killing moisture. So anything you add to the colony is going to be dry. You can add just raw, regular granulated sugar. You can add winter patties, which is basically your protein patty minus a lot of protein. Your normal protein patties in the summertime are high enough protein it forces your queen to lay. You don't want her to lay in a normally broodless period, so you go to the lower protein solution.
Thank you.
Ventilation. We're going to go through ventilation in a couple slides too, but like I said before, cold is not so much of an issue in the Willamette Valley here. Moisture is a huge issue, so proper ventilation and water wicking materials are really important. Top reasons bees will die over winter. Number one, varroa mites. You didn't treat well, your treatment failed, you didn't treat at all. Varroa mites are just going to decimate your hive. You have to treat, you have to be on an integrated pest management schedule. If you can get 4 treatments over the course of the active season, that's perfect. I usually do 2 treatments in spring and 2 treatments in fall. And a lot of beekeepers will do treatments in winter as well, but you have to get specific things to do that. I don't have a whole lot of experience treating in winter yet, but you'd be using oxalic acid with proper respirators and safety equipment. Question in chat. Can you treat the bees now? Yes, absolutely. We are into the first week of August. First week of August is always my first treatment of the season. Right now is questionable. Depending on which medication you use right now, with our heat wave and triple digits coming up, you can treat with Apiguard. You cannot treat with formic acid today. You treat with formic acid today, you're going to kill your bees. Temperature parameters on medications are really important. So temperature parameters for the first 3 days after application with Formic Pro are going to be highs of 83. We are not going to have that this weekend, so you'd have to wait until, I believe, Wednesday. If you are treating with Apigard, they have a treatment high temperature of, it says 105 on the package. I always like to say 103. So you can safely treat with Apigard right now. Again, I would probably wait until Tuesday when it starts to cool down a little bit just to be on the safe side. But you want to do your first treatment in August, and then you'll wait a month and do another treatment before winter sets in. Other reasons bees can die over winter, like I mentioned, excess moisture. Dysentery is something too. If the bees can't get out and relieve themselves, they get upset tummies, which makes it more difficult to process food. It shortens their lifespan, and it can ultimately cause to collapse. If the cluster is too small to begin with, they cannot survive because they cannot thermoregulate properly. They can't keep it warm enough and they'll freeze to death. So you have to have a population that is large enough going into winter that it can survive through the cold and through the wet. Cluster is too large is also a problem. So if you have a ton of bees in there in September, you might want to do a split depending on what kind of population you're seeing. If you've got too many bees and not enough food, you're going to have them starve. It looks like I went over this entire slide already. Sorry about that, guys. So Varroa is kind of an interesting one. You may think, hey, I've been on top of my game. I've done all of my treatments. My bees are huge. They're super healthy. That's actually kind of dangerous too. The healthier your colony and the better off they are as far as mites go, the more vulnerable they become to colonies around them. So if your next door neighbor didn't treat for Varroa at all, they've got a really weak colony, they're not going to survive the winter. Your bees know that. They're like, hey, there's a bunch of free honey next door. They're going to go and rob that hive. They're going to bring Varroa back. So just because you treated early on, you've got low mite numbers, you're like, oh, great, it's August, I have no mites, treat anyway, because they're going to go out and they're going to rob somebody else's hive and bring Varroa back. Just because you don't have mites now doesn't mean you're not going to have mites in a month. So regardless of your tests, I would definitely treat anyhow. A strong colony is going to bring mites back from other colonies. Unless you're 10 miles from anybody who has bees, then it's fine. It's just your colony.
So I have a question.
Huh?
If you're gonna treat anyways, you even have to test.
Good
Just
question.
Treat and
So if you're going to treat anyway and you're already at the maximum treatment, I guess you don't really have to test because regardless of your test, you can't really do anything else. It's just good to know whether or not your mite treatment actually worked. Every now and then you'll buy a package, you'll throw it into your garage, something will happen, it'll get too hot, it'll get too cold, it'll become ineffective for some reason. So you're basically testing at that point to ensure that your treatment worked. I've actually had a package of Formic Pro. I don't know where it came from, but I wasn't paying attention and it had just gone bad. Maybe it wasn't sealed right, maybe it was past its expiration date, but I used this formic acid and then I tested afterwards. I'm like, there's zero difference at all. Found the package later on, it was expired. So I had to treat again right after that. So it's good to test just to be sure that your treatment was effective.
So you're testing after your treatment.
Yes. It's ideal to test before and after so you can compare the numbers. So I'll do a 3-day treatment with a mite board before and after my treatment is completely done.
So you don't have to do the treatment where you're gonna kill your bees.
You can do that. It's actually a lot more accurate rather than using the mite board, the no-kill method, and just counting the mites. If you do the alcohol wash, you're going to get more accurate numbers. It's pretty easy to use it. You're only killing 300 bees. Your natural die-off every day is somewhere around 300 to 500 in the summertime. So really, you're not killing very many of them, and you're using that information to better serve your colony and to increase your chances of overwintering.
When you do your 2 treatments, are you using the same, like you do an Apigard treatment now? Would you do another Apigard treatment after
It
that?
depends on what the weather does, whether or not I alternate my treatments. I want to alternate my treatments. I want to use something different each time I treat. But if I'm backed into a corner by the weather, I will use whatever I possibly can. I was able to use formic acid last week because we had good temperatures. If I were to try and treat right now, I couldn't. So I would use Apigard instead because the threshold is a higher temperature and I'm actually able to treat that. Also important to note that different mite medications are different strengths, different potencies. Formic acid is a flash treatment. You're going to knock down those mites very quickly. Something like Apiguard or Hopguard is more of a long-term treatment. So if you want to knock your population down and then do a long-term treatment, it's going to be a little bit more effective than trying to do 2 long-term treatments. But again, weather permitting. Excess moisture. Poor ventilation is ultimately going to kill your colony here. It leads to diseases, fungal issues, and excess cold. If you've ever been out in a rainstorm in a cotton sweater, no good.
So what do you have to do to get that ventilation?
We're going to go over that a little bit later, and we're going to talk about everything on the table as well. So nosema, chalk brood, dysentery are all things that happen from excess moisture and can ultimately lead to the failure of your colony. Ooh, question in chat. What do you think about Verosan treatment? I have a couple of articles open about this. I have not done much research on it yet. So I will have to do a little bit of research on this. It's a new mite treatment that's supposed to be really awesome, but I don't have enough information at this time to really say anything about it, unfortunately.
The question on the cluster size. So it says 8 to 10 solid frames of bees is a good sized cluster.
Mhm.
We're talking about adult bees, we're not talking
Yes.
about brood.
Mhm.
But that's your winter bees, your 8 to 10 frames.
Yep.
So we don't know now
Mhm.
whether we've got that.
Right now, you're looking at your population and you're going, should I see this kind of population? In September, your wintering should be completely done. You should see everything that you've worked to come to fruition. In September, it's a good idea to have basically 2 full brood boxes totally stuffed with bees and resources. So you should have somewhere between 8 and 12 frames of brood and 8 and 12 frames of resources. It should be roughly 60 to 80 pounds of honey to get them through winter time. And it should be jam-packed with bees. Feeding protein in fall is the key to getting a good sized winter population. Like I was mentioning earlier, different types of protein will encourage different activities in the hive. Right now, you're using about an 18% protein. This is your summer protein, the protein patties that you're putting on all season long. This is going to make it so your queen lays quite a bit more. If she doesn't get enough protein, she slows down on her laying. And what happens naturally just out in the environment is the protein resources, the pollen resources will change from time to time. So in early spring, maybe you don't have very many protein sources, but it'll kind of ramp up through summer. And then in fall, you're going to start seeing the decline of pollen resources again. So what we're doing is we're supplementing protein resources, pollen resources, and we're continuing to encourage our queen to lay.
Would it be good to do 2 protein patties now instead of
It
one?
depends on how much your bees are consuming. You want your bees to have basically an unlimited source of protein. So I will do my once every 2-week inspection and I will judge how much they're consuming. If you put 2 protein patties in there and they only eat a quarter of it, the protein patty will eventually go bad and be kind of yucky in the colony and they won't eat it anymore. So you kind of gauge how much they're consuming. If they eat an entire protein patty, yeah, put a protein patty and half on there next time. If they're eating half a protein patty, just throw a half a protein patty in there. So I change how much I'm feeding based on how much they're eating. What percentage of protein for fall? For fall is definitely the closer to 18%. As you go into winter and you're continuing to feed small amounts of protein, I use a winter protein called Pro Winter Patties, and that's about 4% protein. So quite a bit of a change in percentage there. Here we go, talking about that right here. So best approach, lots of protein in August and September. Leave lots of honey. Like I said, 60 to 80 pounds is great to leave on the colony. You can heft the back of the hive just for a weight estimate. The way I like to put it is most beekeepers can't lift their entire colony from the back. If you can lift it, you should be feeding. Right now, I am feeding a 2-to-1 sugar syrup solution. And what that does is the extra heavy sugar is going to actually be stored in the cells. So if I don't have that 60 to 80 pounds for winter time, and we're in the middle of a nectar dearth right now, there's not a whole lot, well, not a whole lot blooming, they'll actually maybe be consuming their honey stores instead of adding to it. You want to make sure they're not consuming any of that by feeding. And if you put in a really heavy sugar syrup solution, that 2 part sugar to 1 part water, you're going to, one, give them a source that they can consume, and two, give them a source that they can add to their honey stores. During winter, when you're feeding sugar, don't ever feed that sugar syrup. Like I said before, there's just way too much moisture in there. You're contributing to the moisture in the colony. They're not going to really be able to consume it. You want dry granulated sugar or fondant cakes with very, very minimal amounts of moisture.
So where do you put the dry sugar? Because if they're all clustered, are they gonna get up into the top box?
That's a good
Like this
question.
box?
So generally speaking, your fondant is going to be for emergency feed. In the fall, when you have your fondant cakes on there, their cluster is loose enough, the temperatures are still warm enough, they can move around and they can consume that. When it gets really, really cold, you're going to rely on them having enough resources down below. And then when they move up and up and up and they run out of food, you're still going to have that fondant cake. Once the cluster is high enough and they still can't break the cluster, they're going to be basically touching that fondant cake on the top of your frames, like you see in this photo here. Some people will feed in their all seasons inner cover. I don't recommend it because there is that barrier. And if you're clustered down there, you're not going to go above that cluster to access the food. So I always put it directly on the top parts of the frames, whether it be fondant or dry sugar, or you can see the Pro Winter Patty is kind of clustered up here. You want it to get it as close to the cluster as possible.
Do you have something under that sugar?
That's just a screen to make sure that it doesn't fall through the cracks. And they can access the sugar through the cracks and they can climb on top of it as well. But it's basically just make sure that it doesn't fall in between and cause trouble. And you can use a little sheet of newspaper or basically anything for this too. Moisture control. Ventilation is key, especially if you are in the Willamette Valley or if you're a coastal beekeeper. Coastal beekeepers need to be even more concerned about moisture than we do here in the valley. So I don't recommend wrapping or sealing your hive in any way. Allow the most airflow through there possible. Down below, we have what's called a Jacobson board. This is basically just full-on ventilation. You can put a little shim in here or some candy canes or something and then put some burlap on top. And that kind of helps because burlap is a really great water wicking material. So any moisture that doesn't flow out of the hive gets sucked into the burlap and you can change that throughout the winter as needed.
Does that have a screen bottom?
The Jacobson does have just a screen in it. So the bees can't pass through, the burlap can't get stuck to the frames. It just creates a little bit of a barrier there. I use the all seasons inner cover, like in the top photo here. Works wonderful, pulls all the moisture up through the hive, out through the 4 holes on the side. And then you can put just a little shim or something here to elevate. So this little hole sucks moisture up as well, and then put your burlap on top of that. You can use fiber moisture boards as well. So we've got the burlap sachet here, or the moisture board, which goes on top. Anything that pulls up through this board gets stuck in here, it doesn't escape. And this you'll need to change throughout the winter, probably maybe once or twice.
Do you change your burlap yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And is it a danger getting into the hive then?
So the cool thing about this top cover here is there's not really, it's not really invasive to get in. You can pop it open on a warm day, take that moisture wicking material out, replace it with a brand new one, and you're in there for 10 seconds or so. So if it's cold enough, still don't get in, but you can crack the lid just to replace your moisture wicking material and make sure that it is actually still dry.
Would you use just like cotton material or better?
People use a variety of different materials. I like to use burlap because it's just what I have on hand and it works very, very well. A little bit of moisture on top of the burlap is not an issue, but if it's completely soaked, that's when I would swap it out. Some beekeepers will tilt the hive very slightly so that the entrance kind of faces down a little bit. And what happens is any moisture that goes up to the top of the hive and does not escape doesn't collect in the center and drop back down onto the cluster. It slides to the front, slides down, missing the cluster and out of the colony. It's a little bit hairy when you do this because you have to remember to reset the colony and make sure it is completely flat by the time spring buildup happens, or else all of your comb is going to be slightly tilted and you really don't want that. So if you're going to tilt your hive, make absolute sure that you untilt your hive by the time winter breaks and spring buildup begins.
Is that burlap treated with anything?
Nope. You should never use burlap that's treated with anything. It's all just raw stuff. So if you're safe burning it, you're safe putting it into the colony. Something that you can do right now to prepare yourself for winter, check on all of your hive equipment. Look at your brood boxes, look at your frames, look at your bottom boards, look at your telescoping tops. Are there any cracks or chunks out of it? When you put your hive tool in between your boxes, sometimes you'll kind of create a little bit of a groove. You don't want any extra holes or cracks or anything anywhere in your hive, so make sure to repair those before winter sets in. You don't want wind getting into the colony in wintertime.
How would you repair that if it's just a groove from your tool?
So lots of different ways. You can get new boxes and replace them if they're really bad. You can, if it's just a tiny little hole, teeny tiny hole, the bees will propolize that. And as long as you don't break that seal, you're totally fine. If it's kind of in between, it's like it's too big for them to really propolize, but it's too small for me to want to get a whole new box. You can actually just put a little bit of mud on there, and that creates enough of a seal. So when you're, if anyone took my getting into beekeeping class, bees will basically inhabit anything that is fairly airtight in wintertime. So beekeepers years and years and years and years ago would use wicker baskets sealed with mud and dung. So a little bit of mud is great. Wouldn't really recommend using dung. I don't really want to dig around in that, but it's warm.
Hard to get in the town. See.
So entrance reducers. Entrance reducers in summer and entrance reducers in winter should be oriented differently. They do have a correct orientation, or at least for me, they do. During winter, bees will live longer, but they still have natural die-off, and your screen bottom board is going to be littered with dead bees come winter time or come springtime. This is totally natural. This happens. It's just part of life. But you want to have your entrance reducer popped upwards so that if there is a layer of dead bees on the bottom, the dead is not trapping the living inside. So really important to flip your entrance reducer to this new orientation for wintertime. In the summertime, you want to have it down because then it makes it easier for the mortician bees to take the dead bees, drag them out. They don't have a barrier to take them over the top of. Wintertime, it's kind of backwards. So just
now
something
you
to think
want it
about.
down?
Mm-hmm. Varroa mites, not a fun topic, but something we definitely need to look into. If you're seeing mites, like in these pictures right here, you know you have a big problem. Generally, mites are on the underside of the bee. If you're seeing them on top, chances are the underside is full, and that is why you're seeing them on top. So treat if you see anything on top, but you're usually not going to just look at a hive and see mites. You're going to have to actually test for mites to see what kind of mites you have. If you're seeing deformed wing virus like this, you definitely have a problem. You definitely need to treat. You should hopefully never see this. So best case scenario, active mite management through spring, summer, and fall. You're using a variety of different treatments based on temperature, and you're being proactive so that you're not backed into a corner with temperatures. I know weather can be really difficult to predict, and kudos to the meteorologists who try, but they're wrong a lot of the time. So I like to try and start a little bit earlier than I really want to do it, because that way if the weatherman is wrong, I still have a little bit of a window. So you should be treating after establishing a package or nuke or surviving winter. So that's probably April, May area. It does change from season to season. Sometimes the weather doesn't cooperate and you're pushed back a couple weeks here or there.
So we got our nukes in May.
Mm-hmm.
We should have treated them.
Treated in May. As soon as honey flow is done, you want to treat. There are a few medications out there that you can use with honey supers on. I do not recommend it, whether or not it's FDA approved, but that's just my take. So I actually harvest all of my colonies the last week of July. And that does a couple of things. That one allows me to treat in August, and I don't have to worry about treating with honey supers on. And two, that allows the bees to collect some extra resources before winter time. So if I'm not at that 60 to 80 pound mark already, they still have a little bit of foraging time. And I get my honey early.
So if you're leaving honey on for them, you treat with that honey on?
If I'm leaving honey on for them, and I know that I'm never ever going to treat, or I'm never ever going to harvest that particular box for myself, usually I'll mark the frames and go, this is their honey. These are their frames. And then I can treat with that on. Or if I'm like, maybe next year I'll want to harvest this box for myself, I will remove that honey super, put it in my garage, I will treat, and then after my treatment is finished, I'll put that honey super back on. And then I don't have to worry about like, oh, am I gonna put Apigard into my honey next year? So just be on the safe side, mark any frames that are like your honey super that have been treated. Certain things like formic acid you can treat with honey supers on, for instance, but Apigard, yank that honey super off if you think you're ever going to harvest that. It will have residues that will stick inside the wax and will seep into your honey.
So my bees use the second deep for their honey super.
Mhm, that's
It's
totally
all
normal.
honey, no brood. It's a deep. If I treat with Apigard
Mhm.
and leave that on, I'm not going to use that for honey super.
Then that's totally fine. If it's honey for the bees, you can treat. If it's honey for your table, you can't.
And if they use that second deep for brood next year, that's still okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Late September and early October would be my last treatment going into winter, unless I'm going to use oxalic acid, in which case I can use that in the broodless period during winter time. And then again in spring, January, February, if you can.
Is that when temperatures get above 55?
Not necessarily. This is your window for oxalic acid, January through February. January, you might have a teeny bit of brood in there, but it's not a huge issue. February, you're probably gonna have a teeny bit of brood in there, but if you do multiple applications, even though it doesn't get under the brood cappings, you're hitting with oxalic acid all of your phoretic mites, and then you're waiting a period, and then those brood cappings have now hatched. You're treating again. You're hitting the adult population only, but you're getting the ones that used to be under the brood capping. So multiple applications of oxalic acid can be really effective.
That numbering system, as I understood it, it's like, one now and then another later. So it says 2 after the honey flow and then 3 more between.
Not necessarily. This is just number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. So it's just my ordering system here. So you'll do one treatment sometime in April or May. You'll do another treatment in August after honey flow, and then one more before winter, and then you'll do your oxalic acid in winter.
Does oxalic acid need special equipment?
Yes, if you're going to apply oxalic acid, you absolutely need protective equipment. So you'll need certain respirators, and you'll need to just be extra safe with it, whether you do the dribble method or you do the fumigation method. I don't have practical experience applicating oxalic acid at this time, but I'm going to be doing it a little bit this winter, so I'll have more information next year.
Is there another alternative to doing that in the winter?
Nope. You either do oxalic in the winter or you don't.
So if you don't want to use that, then you don't treat in winter and you just
Correct.
wait till spring.
Because all of your other medications require a certain threshold of temperature, and if you throw Apigard in when it's 20 degrees, it's not going to do anything, and you just wasted the product. There are temperature parameters on all of the leaflets that you see on all of these medications. So with Apigard, it has to be 60 degrees as a minimum and 105 as a maximum, and I always say 103. With formic acid, the minimum is 50 degrees and the maximum is 83 degrees. And that is for the first 3 days of application, daytime temperatures.
And Apigard, you're doing it, leaving it on for 2 weeks and then waiting a week or two. and then putting it on again, so that's
The-
considered one treatment.
Yes, that's considered one treatment. Apiguard has to have 2 different applications for a single treatment because it does not breach those wax cappings. So you are treating an adult population, waiting for the cappings to emerge, and then treating the adult population again to hit the entire population.
You don't have to hit it twice with because the instructions on the formic acid say do the same thing.
The formic acid's got 2 different control methods. You can either use 1 strip, wait 10 days, use another strip, and that's a full treatment, or you can do the huge
You
flash
can.
treatment, which is a little bit more dangerous. You've got to be really careful about temperatures. You'll use 2 strips at a time and it's done. So that's a 2-week treatment versus a 4-week. A lot of people are a little bit leery about doing the flash treatment with formic because you do have increased chances of brood loss, queen loss, brood interruptions, that sort of thing. If you just have a brood interruption, that's actually a positive thing because the mites are reproducing in the brood. You have a brood break, you're further decreasing your mite population. But you do have to be really careful because it is a strong treatment. And if you have a 90-degree day in there, when you put 2 patties on there, the chances are a lot higher that you're going to lose some bees, you're going to lose your queen.
Yeah, I did do 1 strip and it actually looks like it's gonna work out perfect because the 10 days is coming up.
Awesome.
When it drops back down to the 80s again, so.
There we go. Other wintering issues. So sun position, make sure your apiary is positioned in a way that your colonies are going to get the maximum amount of sun during wintertime. I usually put my colonies underneath deciduous trees, which yes, does a lot of maintenance and cleanup throughout the season, but they get afternoon shade in the summertime and they get full sun in the wintertime because that tree's dropped all of its leaves. And I've done all of this work cleaning it all up because it's a huge mess. But it works out for the bees, so I'll do it for them. So sun position, wind is another issue. You want to make sure that your hive is positioned so that it doesn't get direct wind chills. If it's warm enough and there's a little bit of wind, you still want your bees to be able to do little cleansing flights or little foraging flights. They can't really do that if the cold winter wind is hitting their entrance. So watch out for wind, have the maximum amount of sun, avoid mice, and we're going to get into that as well. And storing honey supers and things and extra boxes can be a big issue in winter too. This is probably the nastiest photo you're going to see all year. Wax moths. They are not a problem until they are. This happened in the span of 1 week. I went in there and I checked. Everything was fine. Nothing flying, nothing crawling, no feces, nothing. Following week, I went in. Oh my gosh, what happened? They were improperly stored boxes. The fan had broken and there was not enough light. So the thing about wax moths is they will lay all their eggs in a frame, wait for you to store your frames, and if there's complete darkness, no airflow, your wax moth population is going to explode. They're going to eat all of your wax. They're going to make a huge mess everywhere and then crawl into any wooden space that you have. So if you are going to be storing frames, make sure you have good airflow, excellent lighting. You can kill off the eggs before you store. So if you freeze frames for 3 days before storage, that kills any eggs present. If you go through and you're like, I don't know, am I seeing anything? You can freeze your frames for 3 days again, put them back in. But
And these are only on frames that have been used.
these are on frames specifically that have had brood in them. So if you're only storing honey frames, chances are pretty low that there are any wax moths in there. It's still possible, but it's unlikely that they're going to inhabit strictly honey frames. Brood frames, they love because they're little pupal casings in the cells that the workers can't quite clean out, and they're really going for any protein source they can find. So brood frames are at high risk for wax moth predation. Good light and ventilation. Wax moths can't lay or reproduce in bright spaces. So good airflow, good lighting. If you've just got a couple of frames and you try and put it in an airtight container, if there are already eggs in there, doesn't matter. They're going to come out, they're going to eat everything, and you're going to have a huge mess. So if you're going to put something in an airtight container, make sure to freeze it first and then do that. They can fit through teeny tiny little holes too. So if you go ahead and freeze your frames, throw them in a container, there's a paper clip sized hole in that container, they can get in through that. I've tried it. So don't learn from my experiment, not through your own experience.
So what is the best way to
The best way to store them
Right.
is with great airflow. So what I do is I put my box on a shelf and I have a couple of extra boxes lying around. So I'll have 2 brood boxes for 1 brood box worth of frames. I'll space all those frames out and I have just a little strip of lights that I drape over the top of it. And that's enough light to prevent the wax moths from actually growing. If you've got a little fan in there or something, you're constantly fanning the door or whatever, more airflow the better. But just that light is all you need. A little bit of string on top. I use a little LED string light. Whether or not the bees will use this. This is a perfect example of something the bees will reject. Huge wax moth predation, usually the bees won't clean this up. They'll clean up a huge mess. You pull this nasty moldy frame out, it's just absolutely disgusting. Throw it in the hive, 2 or 3 days later, totally clean, they're using it. Wax moth is something that is like, it's so gross, they won't even use it. So small predation, a little bit of webbing, no problem. They'll probably still use it. But if you see a frame scenario like this, get rid of your frames. They're basically toast. So mice are not such a problem that they want to necessarily eat all of your honey and destroy all your bees. They're just looking for a nice warm spot to hang out. They are wanting to shelter, so they're going to destroy a bunch of comb in the bottom box usually, just to kind of make this nice insulated little mess for them. It's a huge mess. It's something you can deal with, but it's something you really don't want to deal with. And they'll actually eat the dead bees too. So your natural die-off, for some reason, or I don't know why this is, they like to just eat the heads and then they leave the bodies. It's weird.
Can they get through a little hole in?
They can get through some pretty small holes. So we do have special mouse guards, like you see in this photo right here. Mouse cannot fit through here, but a honeybee can. So the honeybee still has ventilation. They still have access in and out of the hive, but a mouse cannot get in there to mess up the bottoms of the combs. If a mouse dies inside the hive, it's too large for honeybees to move. They want to get rid of it. They don't want it toasting in there and creating a huge mess. So what they'll do is they will fan their wings all around it. They'll propolize all around it. They'll basically mummify the mouse. So you get a nice little present, just like when a cat brings it to you in the springtime.
So if you have your reducer on and you've got it on the small hole, a mouse can get through there?
Sometimes,
They put its
yes.
head through it.
Yep. Small mice can make it through an entrance reducer on small. The mouse guard will prevent that.
Did you do the mouse guard and the reducer, or?
I just use a mouse guard. If you're worried about having the entrance too big, you can just put a little bit of tape on there and reduce the entrance that way. But during winter, I only use a mouse guard. I'll replace my entrance reducer, or I'll just use the entrance reducer and go, it's small enough that big mice can't get in. And I don't actually have mice where I am so far, knock on wood. So I do use an entrance reducer.
Does the entrance reducer help with the cold?
The entrance reducer will block a lot of like your wind chill and things.
Yeah, so then it would be a good idea to do the entrance reducer and the.
Well, if you're wanting to reduce the entrance with the mouse guard on, just use a little bit of tape there, and then you're gonna reduce the entrance, and you won't have to use both pieces, and it won't get in the way. Oh, cats can help too. That's my buddy Daxter. He's not allowed in the house with that, by the way. So mold. A lot of beekeepers think, oh gosh, mold killed my hive. No, it's backwards. Bees will not tolerate mold in their hive. They're very clean creatures. Any mold that they find, they will immediately clean out. Mold is what happens after a colony dies. So if you're seeing mold in the hive, colony is not doing too well, they're not cleaning it up, the colony is not able to clean it up, and it's probably to the point that they are not going to make it at that point. So mold is commonly found in dead out colonies, sometimes in frames and equipment that is far from the cluster. So if your cluster is way up in your emergency feed, your top honey box, the bottom frames in your brood box in the first box may have some mold on it. It's not a problem. The bees will clean it up. You don't have to do anything. They will take care of it if they're still alive. Badly molded frames can be cleaned or rejected, but I've never actually had like a really gnarly, nasty, moldy frame be rejected before. It's only the wax moth stuff that they're like, ooh, I'm not touching that. So mold is not really a problem. It's something that you're going to see. It's a common thing. So don't worry too much if you see mold. It'll be taken care of by the bees. Sun exposure to the hive. I went over this briefly. Consider your winter sun position. Consider if you have trees above your colony, that sort of thing. How much sun are they going to get per day? If you're in an area where you're like, oh gosh, once it hits wintertime, the sun position changes and they're going to be in the shade, maybe you want to move your colony before winter sets in so that they do have the ideal amount of sun. Consider wind exposure as well. You can kind of rotate the hive entrance if you need to at this time. We're still in late summer, early fall, so you can do all of these winter preparations before it's too late and you realize, oh gosh, I've got a huge wind chill, I've got a bunch of shade. You're considering what winter looks like right now so that you can do all of your preparations and you won't have to do anything once winter actually sets in. I think I've gone over everything here. Hive configurations. So we were talking about where the cluster is and what they're going to do during winter. This is when we're going to get kind of more into the meaty part of it here. So this is an ideal fall configuration. Right now, you're going to be wondering, like, where is my colony? Where is my cluster? Where should they be right now? If you've got your second brood box totally full of honey right now, you're in great shape. If you've got your bottom brood box full of brood right now, you're in great shape. If you have something kind of in the middle, kind of wait until they move into one box or the other, and you can flip-flop your boxes at this point. You want your brood on the bottom so that they can naturally rise up through the wintertime.
So you said that you want 2 brood boxes full of bees. You don't have that now? Do you want to do another brood box?
So you should have 2 brood boxes full of bees going into winter. Whether that has all resources or all brood, it needs to be about half and half. If you've only got 1 brood box on right now, you want to encourage them to fill that second brood box to have enough numbers to stay warm enough through the winter and enough resources to stay full enough through the winter. You'd mentioned you have 2 brood boxes right now. One's honey, one's brood.
Yeah.
That's perfect scenario.
Okay, so it's
So you're
not
looking
2
good.
boxes full of brood.
It's not 2 boxes full of brood. Like you see in this image right here, we've got 1 brood box that's just nothing but honey, and we've got another brood box that's just brood, and maybe a little bit of honey on the sides. The wintering cluster is in dark right here, so you see that there's just these 4 frames right here that's full of brood, and this is your cluster too. This is what you should be seeing. If for some reason your bottom box is full of honey and your top box is full of brood, that's kind of backwards. So you want to flip-flop those. So you do have this configuration going into wintertime. If you have this wintering cluster halfway between boxes, don't move them. You don't want to break that brood nest at all. If they're all in one box and all in another box, then you can move them around. But if they're in between 2 boxes, let them be and let them do their thing. So September is kind of the point of no return here. You should be happy with your hive configuration, your colony health, your ratio between honey and bees at this point. That's basically the finish line. That's when you should be seeing everything you're doing right now come to fruition. I've got a question in chat. I have 1 brood box and a super on top. Should I add 1 more super now? As long as they're continuing to fill that super, yes, I would. Keep an eye on that super that you add through this month and through next. If they only have it halfway filled, I would probably remove that super and use that for spring feed. If they have over half of it filled, leave it on for resources. You don't want to have a bunch of empty space in your colony, but you do want to have extra food. So if you've got a ton of extra food, a whole super full of extra food, you can leave that on there. If you've got just a bunch of extra space and a couple frames of honey, yank that off and use it for spring feed. Effectively, the cluster heats inside the cluster, so they're not really going to be heating up in that brood box or anything, but it is extra area that could be predated on by wax moths and just stuff that you can't really monitor and you can't really feed. So if you just got a couple of extra frames, there's no point in leaving it on the box. Does that make sense? Okay, where were we here? Talked about rearranging. If the box has no usable resources, remove it. The cluster B should be compact and spherical and lowest portion of the hive. As I said before, temperature makes a big difference here. So if you're looking in here right now, you're not really going to see a cluster. We're getting into the 100 degrees. They're all going to be spread throughout the entire colony, working on different things. As it gets colder and it gets closer to winter time, you're starting to see like, oh, it's starting to rain half the time. It's getting down to 50, 60 degrees. You're going to see that the cluster is much, much smaller. They're a lot tighter when it gets colder. Again, don't go into your colony if it's below 55 degrees, but you'll kind of notice depending on the temperature. If you go out there tomorrow in the early morning, it's really, really warm, but not super hot. They're going to be all over the place. If you go in when it's 60 degrees, you're going to notice big differences to where your bees are in the colony.
So you want to take that empty box off, excuse me, by September?
Mhm.
Because right now I've got a super on
In-
top that they're just using as extra space. They're not doing anything.
In September, I'd be a little bit worried about doing anything else. I would want to take it off the probably middle or end of October. If they're keep an eye on that box as you're doing your once every 2 week inspections. And if they're not filling it by the end of this month, even if it's just staying stagnant, you can take it off. Because once we get into middle of October, that's when the rains really start. And that really limits your options to get into the hive and do any extra work. So figure out what they're doing right now. And if they're just leaving that alone and they're working below, then you're not going to really need to worry about that box. Every colony is a little bit different. Some colonies are still raking in the resources. Some colonies are like, I'm kind of happy with what I've got right now. And they're bringing in resources a lot slower. Or maybe depending on your area, they have less resources to pull from. So depending on your location and your particular colony, they may or may not be filling as fast as somebody else's. So ideal early winter hive configuration. They're going to be leaving empty cells behind them as the last of your winter bees will hatch out and they have eaten the resources on the sides of the boxes. They're going to slowly move up where resources are more plentiful and just continue moving up and wherever the food is.
When you put your sugar on top, your granulated sugar, do you put it on top of the top box or do you put it on top of the bottom brood box?
You don't want to put anything on the bottom brood box. You don't want to break that seal. The idea is they've got plenty of resources down here, and in the early winter, it's usually warm enough they can move around. So your emergency feed's going right on top. If it's warm enough they can reach it, they'll walk up and they'll reach it. If it's really cold, they'll stay in their small cluster and it'll just be available for them later on. But you don't want to break this configuration once you get into winter. The only thing you'll be doing is you'll be popping the lid, putting sugar on, putting the lid back down. Your visit should be under 5 minutes in the wintertime.
And do you want to wait until they've used those honey resources to put sugar on, or do you just want to?
I have them available as much as possible. So you want your fondant cake on there as soon as you can, and you want to make sure that that cake just remains there. If you're doing a huge fondant cake, that'll usually last you just about all winter. If you're doing pro winter patties, that'll last you at least half the winter, depending on how much you put on. And you don't want to put too much of that stuff in one area because it kind of is squishy. Going through winter on days that are above 55 degrees, you should see some activity in the hive. So if you go out and you just kind of take a look at the entrance, you should see a couple of them back and forth. If you see no activity at all on a day where they should be out foraging or doing cleansing flights, relieving themselves, that sort of thing, what I like to do is I like to go over to the side of the hive, put my ear on it and just kind of tap. And you should hear just kind of like a ooh, gentle kind of hum, or they're a little bit like, oh, what was that? Warrants a closer look if you're not hearing anything from them. If it's warm enough, it's over 55 degrees, you're checking on them, you're not hearing anything, it's warm enough that you can actually break that colony. You can see whether or not you've got a dead out. If you do have a dead out, then you have that opportunity to take the box apart, store your frames properly, protect from wax moth, that sort of thing, and start again in springtime. But if you leave that colony there, you've got all this extra space that's now completely unguarded, and your wax moths explode and your entire colony just turns to mush. So every now and then just go out there and see what they're doing, make sure they're still active and alive in there.
But only if it's over 55 degrees.
Yep. So in wintertime, your only job is to stare at your phone and go, still too cold. Nope. Still too cold. Nope. Hey, it's a warm day. Let's go out. And even then, you do have to consider if you're actually going to get into that hive on a 55-degree day, is it going to be 55 degrees the next day and the day after that? Because they're going to have to reseal anything that you've broken. So if you can stay out of the hive and know that they're okay in there, it's ideal just not to go in during winters. Leave them alone.
So if you hear them,
If you hear them, then you're good. Once you hit somewhere around February or so, you're starting to really worry about their resources. You're hefting the back of the hive, going like, oh, they're feeling kind of light. You might want to consider emergency feeding at that point, but you want to leave them alone for as long as possible. Ideal late winter hive configuration. So brood rearing is going to begin at the winter solstice. So that means that they're going to be consuming more energy stores because they're going to be heating the hive from that 83 degrees up to that 93 degrees again. They'll be eating faster. They'll probably be wanting to move around a little bit more, but it's still really cold. So you're relying on all of your honey resources still. They should be in that second box, working through the honey stores in that second box. When I say late winter, I'm talking like February and stuff like that. So this is when the hives are the most vulnerable, when they're consuming more of that food. Hopefully they've got enough to get them through until the point that they can go out and start foraging, or you can do some emergency feeding. So this is what the fat bees are for. If there's not quite enough food, they have those extra fat stores in their bodies, that extra patilogelin. So they are using those protein reserves to care for the brood, to care for themselves, and to get them through the worst part of the winter here. When spring hits and you're seeing consistent temperatures above 55 degrees and brood rearing is really started up again, and you're really starting to see like, hey, this is a spring hive, not a winter hive anymore. At that point, you can actually flip-flop your configuration again. And so you see the top box has got all these honeybees in here and some resources left over, and the bottom box is totally empty. They've eaten up all the resources here. There's no brood. There's just nothing in this bottom box. At that point, when it's warm enough in spring and you're getting into the spring buildup, you can take this bottom box and throw it on top of that box there. So effectively, it looks like this again. And then this is the normal spring buildup. This is what you want to see. That cluster is going to continue wanting to rise up. They have a hard time going down. So if you leave that configuration like this, they might never use that brood box. And then you'll just keep stacking stuff up top and go, what happened to my brood box? It's just empty. So that's why I flip my boxes in the springtime. So key points preparing for winter. Winter prep is going to happen all season. You're going to want to make sure that your bees have ample amounts of food. You want to make sure that you have protein and sugar syrup for them. Mite control is something that you are working on all season long. You're never going to get a 0 for mites when you treat. You're never going to knock them down to absolutely nothing. You're just knocking down a percentage. So you want to keep that percentage small so you continue knocking down percentages and you keep your population mites small. You start in springtime and you're working on this all throughout the season.
would you be feeding sugar syrup now?
Yes, I'm feeding sugar syrup right now.
Do you do it through the summer or just do it?
The only time I don't feed sugar syrup, the only 2 times I don't feed sugar syrup is during the honey flow, when they're preparing extra honey for my table. I don't want sugar syrup in my honey. And I don't feed sugar syrup when it is in the winter months when they cannot consume that amount of moisture. So in the spring buildup, I'm feeding sugar syrup at a weekend rate, 1-to-1 ratio. So it simulates a light nectar flow, kind of helps their wax build up. It helps them just kind of break their winter cluster sort of deal. And then in the fall, I'm trying to get them to continue to build up their winter stores. So in the late summer and fall, I'm feeding them that 2-to-1 extra thick sugar
So
syrup.
now you'd be doing a 2-to-1?
Yes. And I will be feeding as much as they will take. If they're consuming it in 3 days, I'll continue feeding it. If they're consuming it in a week, I'll continue feeding it a week. But depending on their uptake of sugar syrup, I'll change how much I feed them at a time. If they're doing a whole gallon a week, that's great. I'll keep it up. If they're only doing a half a gallon a week, I'll slow it down and I'll throw a half a gallon in a week because that's how much they're consuming.
If they're consuming that much sugar syrup,
Mhm.
are they still making honey and then do you need?
So the
Extra
reason
sugar?
you're putting your sugar syrup in there is not only to help with their winter stores, it's also because the stores out in nature are a little bit less right now. There aren't as many floral resources, and with the heat wave that's coming on, it's going to be drying out all of those floral resources. Nectar is going to come a lot harder to come by when the heat shrivels up all the flowers. So you are supplementing their feed and you're just making sure that they have as much as they need. So year to year, they're going to be consuming more or less depending on what your temperatures are doing. You see I've got rain cover on all of my colonies over here. What this does is it gives the bees a little bit of a flyway. So one, sideways rain isn't going to be getting into the entrance of the colony. And two, the bees have probably a 12 to 18-inch kind of porch. So that on warmer days, even if it's raining, they can go out, they can relieve themselves, they can go back into the hive. Honeybees can basically hold it for months at a time in wintertime, but if they can go out and relieve themselves, it will help to prevent dysentery and all sorts of other issues. Preparing for winter key points 2. Good ventilation, moisture wicking materials. You should be using your All Seasons inner cover or your Jacobson inner cover, either one. You should be using a moisture board or some extra burlap sachets. I honestly prefer the burlap over the moisture board, but both work great as long as you check on them periodically. Proper winter configuration arranged by the beekeeper. Bottom box should be brood, top box should be honey. Any empty boxes or less than half boxes should be removed. Rain cover to allow bees cleansing flights. We talked about this in this slide here. Windbreak to prevent chilling. This beekeeper here, they have a just kind of metal block around their colony to prevent any wind chill. I suppose it's acceptable, but I would be kind of worried about the wind making clanging noises and bothering the bees too. So if you can create a windbreak that is a little bit more stable, that's going to be a lot more ideal. Slightly tilted hive. If you decide to do this, make sure you make it completely even as soon as the spring buildup starts, or you're going to have a huge mess on your hands. You should have your mouse guard or entrance reducer installed and with proper orientation. Winter feed, protein, dry sugar, or fondant at the ready. Losses are going to happen no matter who you are, where you're from, how many years you've been doing it. Losses are just a part of beekeeping. So you're not alone. You can talk to all your other beekeepers, like, what did you do? Here's what my hive looked like. If you go to OSU's Friday in the Apiary, so you can take frames with you and go, hey, what happened to my colony? Can you help to diagnose why they died? There's a lot of people around who have been dealing with this for many, many years and have a lot of experience and a lot of ties to other beekeepers. So chat around. Haha, good question. Question in chat, if you have a screen bottom board, should you cover the screen or is the airflow good? Depending on who you talk to, the answer is different. I am very much for ventilation. I removed my mite board from my screen bottom board for optimal airflow. So all winter long, no mite board, just airflow. And I have had pretty good success with this. I did this during the ice storm a couple of years ago. They survived. So bees are extremely good at thermoregulation, keeping their temperature where it should be. They're not so good if they're stuffy and cold, stuffy and wet. So I go ventilation all the way. Other beekeepers are going to fight me tooth and nail and say, absolutely leave that mite board in. So it kind of depends on which take you believe. Also kind of depends on your area. If you've got a river flowing underneath your colony, maybe that's going to be a different situation. That shouldn't be the case ever, but key points going through the winter. Very limited options once winter hits. You're at the end of September, you're basically in winter. You should see everything already done. You don't really have the option to go into the hive because it's going to be too rainy, it's going to be too cold. You're just sailing through the winter time at that point. So avoid opening the hives if at all possible. Don't ever open in too cold or too wet weather, or too windy for that matter. Emergency feeding when possible, but no liquid syrup. warm, dry days with little to no wind. You're looking for warming trends, not just warming afternoons. Because if you break that seal, again, it's going to take them quite a while to build that seal back up and to be ready for the cold temperatures again. So 55 degrees is the minimum to enter the hive. If it's life or death, 50 is absolute minimum. 49 degrees, if they're going to starve, they're going to starve. If you open it up, you're going to kill them. So 55 degrees is a good point. You can open up, you can do some emergency feeding, not too much colder than that. You should have great sun exposure. Egg laying will begin sooner than you think. Solstice is when it starts. So they're going to have to keep that colony a lot warmer, and you're going to be really careful about not visiting too often. Winter's a great time to educate yourself, fix up old equipment, read a good book, meet new beekeepers, just do things that don't involve getting into the hive. So everything that you didn't have time for during the in-season, check it out in the off-season and go, hey, what did I do this year that I should have done differently? What am I going to do differently next year? Make a plan. Just kind of do everything that you didn't have time for during the season. Order nukes and packages too. If you think that you've got to die out, if you want to expand your apiary, something like that. Ordering actually starts quite early. Here at Chenard's, we do package and nuke pre-orders beginning in early January. So you can get your pre-order in, you don't have to worry about it, and then you get an email when package day or nuke day is going to arrive. Moving into spring, so regular brood rearing begins January to early February. Yes, the brood rearing starts after the solstice, but the queen doesn't really get into the thick of things until January, February. She'll lay a couple of eggs, she'll have kind of a brood sphere, but she won't start going into basically full production until quite a bit later.
How long does the queen live?
So that's kind of a loaded question. How long does the queen live? It depends on several factors. It depends on how well she's mated, for one. It also depends on how well your colony as a whole does, like over winter and things. It depends on mite load, disease load. Your typical queen these days will last anywhere from 2 to 3 years. Some specialty queens can live 6 or 7 years, but it's very rare. And a lot of beekeepers will simply pinch their queen in the fall, requeen, and then have a brand new queenie every single year, because then they know that they're mated well, they are going to be good producers, and they're a fresh queen, they're not an old queen, they're not going to be running out of sperm.
Does she have to do a second mating flight?
Once a queen is mated, that's it. So if she goes out for her mating flight, her nuptial flight, and she doesn't mate with any drones, she comes back to the hive, she's not mated, she doesn't leave again. She only goes out for that mating flight one time in her life for that 2-week period, and then it's done. She'll never leave the hive again unless she swarms or absconds. Moving into spring in that January, February area, it might be getting warm enough on a periodic basis for the bees to go out and forage, but it's still too early to feed sugar syrup. So you are still relying on your fondants and your winter protein patties and your dry sugar. You only want to start liquid feed when temperatures are consistently above that 55-degree mark. The rains have kind of backed off a little bit. You're basically into what feels like a comfortable spring. So this changes year to year quite a bit. Just feel it out. It's like, oh great, it's been 3 weeks of great sun and they've been out. We think it's gonna be consistently spring at this point. Then you can start feeding your sugar syrup. But if it's like, it's great this week and next week we're gonna go back into rains, continue waiting on that sugar syrup and just do the dry feed. At this point, you're getting ready for the spring buildup and you're just gonna see it turn a switch. Suddenly they're out foraging, they're building their population, they're really happy, they're moving stuff around. Then we're back into the spring beekeeping season. So hopefully everyone learned a couple of things today. I'm gonna open it up for questions right now, and thanks everyone for listening to me.
Thank you.